abortion bans violate religious freedom. The Texas legislature, by imposing a narrow religious viewpoint during the last previous sessions, have violated the religious freedom of all Texans, no matter what our particular individual beliefs are. And that's why we from Americans United for Separation of Church and State and our co-sponsors for tonight's evening event, Texas Impact and Faith Commons, are so glad that you came. I'm Nancy Friedman, President of the Greater Houston Chapter of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Thank you. Thank you for that nice round of applause. Americans United is a nonpartisan, nonprofit educational and advocacy organization that works to protect the right of all of us to believe as we want and to stop anyone from imposing their beliefs on us and harming us. Americans United works in the courts, in the legislatures, and in the realm of public opinion to support freedom, if I can get this tagline right, freedom without favor and equality without exception. It's important that I get that right because those are very important concepts. The Greater Houston chapter of Americans United has been around for quite a while. The national organization has been around for 75 years. We here in Houston work to protect church-state separation through our programs, education, advocacy. And I want to tell you just two examples of what we've been doing recently. We're still doing, and we're going to continue working because after all, this is Texas, and there are a lot of challenges here in Texas. During the last legislative session, we worked on our own and in coalition with other organizations to oppose certain bills that were introduced in the legislature, such as for vouchers, to require school vouchers in public schools, to require the display of 10 Commandments and a particular text of 10 Commandments in public school classrooms, and to let schools, public schools, hire or use chaplains as counselors in their schools without any restrictions on the chaplains proselytizing. In fact, amendments, when the bill was being debated in the House, amendments offered by some to bar the chaplains from proselytizing were defeated. And then after the chaplains bill passed, we worked to ask our supporters, in particular school districts, to contact their trustees because as part of the law that was passed, every public school district in Texas was required to vote on whether or not to allow chaplains in schools. So what we as a chapter did was contact our supporters in specific school districts, as I said, and ask them to contact their trustees and urge them not to allow chaplains in schools. And I'm happy to say that, you know, in Texas we think, well, there aren't really many victories, but we did have a victory. Not just us, but our side had a victory that very few school districts in Texas, and none of the 25 biggest ones, voted to allow chaplains to go and counsel their schools, their students in their schools. Yeah. So that's a very important victory. Another thing that our chapter is doing right now is we have written or come up with a presentation called Reproductive Freedom is Religious Freedom. It's on the same topic as tonight's program. We have given it to students, to lawyers groups, at congregations, nonprofits. We gave it to an annual day of learning in the Jewish community in Houston. And I'm happy to say it's been well received. We want to give this presentation as far and wide as we can because it's an important issue. And if you don't think so now, I promise you, you will by the time this program is over. So we need your help to do that. If you're a member of a group, any kind of group that you think might want to hear the presentation, please get in touch with us tonight, sometime later. If you get up at 3 in the morning and you think about it, write it down. You can email us at 3 in the morning even, but please help us get the word out. We are scheduling the presentations in person in Houston and in the Dallas area, and we'll also do them virtually. We will work with you and your group to schedule the program at a time and a place that's convenient to your members. We will come to you. So that's the second thing that we've been spending a lot of our time doing. Americans United has been around more than 75 years. During that time, we have been the only national organization that has dedicated all of its time to fighting for separation of church and state. And that's why Americans United is considered the experts in the field, and we are known and respected by others for our leadership in that field. That's why I'm so proud to be a member of this organization. We are fortunate tonight to have with us panelists who are nationally known for their expertise and their efforts in this field. First, we have our organization's president and CEO, Rachel Lazar, who you did see briefly in the film. She became president and CEO of Americans United in 2018, and I'm always proud to say that I was serving as a member of the Board of Trustees at that time, and so I played a role in our organization hiring her. She is a lawyer and a strategist and an advocate who has spent her career dedicated to making our country more inclusive. Some of her positions, professional positions that she held before coming to AU, were as an educator on white privilege and racism, deputy director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism in Washington, D.C., and senior counsel at the National Women's Law Center. Rabbi Joshua Fixler, to her left, is associate rabbi here at Temple Emmanuel in Houston. He serves on the steering committee of several organizations, including the Houston Rabbinical Association, the Faith Leaders Coalition of Greater Houston, and the Religious Action Center of Texas, the same organization that Rachel Lazar was involved in D.C. He's a member of the board of directors of a national organization called the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, and you can tell by its name what that organization does. Kyle Riley, our moderator, is a public witness mobilizer at Texas Impact, an interfaith policy network that's based in Austin. And if any of you belong to a particular denomination or a house of worship, it's possible that that house of worship or that denomination is a member of Texas Impact. He leads Texas Impact's Reproductive Rights Legislative Action Group. His current focus is on reproductive health policy. He's in his third and final year of a Master of Divinity program, and he will be ordained as a minister in the United Church of Christ Church in January. So without further ado, please take over.
Well, I just want to say thank you to both of you for joining us this evening for this wonderful conversation, and thank you all for being here with us. So first of all, I want to ask, what about the perspectives shared in the film are so important for people across the country and people here tonight to have heard?
Is this working? Hello? Okay, hi. First of all, I just wanted to thank you all for coming out tonight. This is always the best part of my job, to get to be with crowds like this. I wanted to thank Nancy Friedman, who has been an incredibly dedicated national board member, chapter leader, and advocate in your community. Reverend Omar and St. Philip's Church, because it's so generous to open it up, and Reverend Omar even came to our Summit for Religious Freedom in Washington. Faithful Commons, Reverend almost Kyle, Rabbi Fixler. It's just really exciting to be with you all. I believe that religious freedom requires reproductive freedom. And having grown up, I'm Generation X, in a time where abortion rights were protected my whole life by apparently privacy, which, was taken away by Justice Alito authoring the Dobbs decision. I didn't think a lot about how abortion was a religious freedom issue. I didn't. And it's funny because a lot of our members who are in particular older, and oftentimes even, and it's been something I've just noticed consistently, older men, when I say, what brought you to AU? They say the abortion issue, And I feel like it's something that generation gets better, and maybe now Gen Z is getting because religious extremists have such overreach in this country. But that would be, to me, the biggest takeaway, which is it's time to start pointing out the connection between religious freedom and so many freedoms and so much of what equality is about. That's our new tagline, freedom without favor, equality without exception, that Nancy talked about. But what we like to say is, if you're a champion for reproductive freedom, if you believe in LGBTQ equality, if you believe in thriving public schools, if you believe in the right to read and to learn, if you believe that climate deniers are problematic, right? If you believe in compassionate care when people are dying, right? All these things sit on the wall that separates church and state. And when that wall is attacked, those rights and freedoms and equality tumble with it.
I second all the thank yous that Rachel said, and I also want to say welcome to Rachel, to Houston, or as I call it, the front lines of the fight against white Christian nationalism. We're really glad you're here. For me, the important takeaway from the film is something that may not come as news to a lot of people in this room, but comes as news to a lot of people I talk to, which is that Jewish law permits abortion. In fact, Jewish law understands that if a pregnant person's life is threatened, that she is not permitted but required to have an abortion to save her life. Jewish law has lots of debate about what that threat could look like and what it should and shouldn't include, etc. But at its essence, Jewish law permits and sometimes even requires abortion. And for a lot of people, they have never heard a person of faith, a religious person, a religious leader say that sentence. My religion permits abortion. My religion requires abortion in certain circumstances. And so for me, as a starting place for a conversation about religious freedom, to understand that my tradition sits in that position, our tradition sits in that position, is really important, because there is an understanding that that religious communities are monolithic on the issue of abortion, and they are not. And once we understand that there is religious diversity on this issue, then questions about separation of church and state and protecting religious freedom become incredibly important.
I wanted to jump on that point. Something that I notice from the position where I sit is the way religion, in the context of political debates, seems to be equated with ultra-conservative Christianity. And the numbers don't reflect that reality. So white evangelical Christians represent 14% of the population, of the general population. I understand it's different in various locations, but still, white Christians ceased to be a majority in America back in 2014. My friend Robbie Jones, who runs a group called PRRI, and they do research on the intersection between policy, politics, and religion, recently tweeted, the majority of faiths would complete the sentence, abortion should be ... mostly legal. So I think it's really important for people who have a religious identity to join with people who are non-religious today to say, my religion counts too. This is America. We're premised on that belief. And we've got to understand that religion is broader than how it's being talked about today.
Thank you both. It was discussed a little bit in the video, but I'd like to dig into this a little more. Many people are hoping, I would say, that federal legislation will come supersede and reverse these state abortion bans. How does that fit into this larger constellation of religious freedom issues that are playing out in our federal and state governments?
That's not a cheerful topic Kyle. It's challenging moment when it comes to, for one, our U.S. Supreme Court, right? And I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but it still is shocking, right, to have a Supreme Court justice who flies the signature flag of the white Christian nationalist movement outside of his vacation home. That's shocking still. To have the Speaker of our House of Representatives, of the People's House, fly that same appeal to heaven flag, the one that we saw all over the insurrection, outside of his office in the Capitol, right? So, and in state capitals as well, we're witnessing much of the same extremism. The good news is the amount of overreach is staggering. It is staggering. And therefore, we are seeing states, communities like you all rise up together and put abortion rights into their state constitutions, right? So I feel that today there's actually more going on fighting back in the states than there is right at this moment as much possibility of passing a protective law. Don't forget, recently we've seen, and I want to state what Nancy stated again, that we're a nonpartisan group, so I'm being descriptive, as David Saperstein would say, instead of prescriptive. But I will just say that we've witnessed Republicans in Congress voting against IVF protections and against birth control protections, like within the past few months. Look it up.
You're the expert on the national situation even more than me. So, and you know, I am heartened to see that where abortion has been on the ballot and put to the people and not only to elected officials who are trying to appeal to their bases, that overwhelmingly the people have chosen to protect abortion rights. It's not an option we have presently in the state of Texas. And so part of our challenge is figuring out how to operate in a world where a referendum isn't a strategy for us.
Thank you. So, Rabbi Fixler, I do specifically want to ask you, in your experience here in Texas, what role do religious leaders have in advancing reproductive rights for people? And then for you, Rachel, in your experience with the AU, what role can religious leaders play nationally?
Well, I think there are two really important roles. One is that where there are conversations happening about these issues in legislative spaces, faith leaders of many faiths that support reproductive freedom need to show up, need to continue to share the message that people of faith believe in reproductive freedom and reproductive choice, and that people of faith believe in bodily autonomy and people's ability to make choices about their lives and their family. But the other thing that I think faith leaders can do, should do, that I try to practice and encourage my colleagues to do is talk about abortion from the bema or the pulpit. We have to, if we want to fight bans on abortion, we have to fight abortion stigma, which means that we need people to feel like they can tell the stories of their lives, all the stories of their lives. And that includes the stories of their reproductive lives, and that includes the stories of their abortions. And people need to hear both the stories that are in our sacred texts about people's reproductive lives and the stories that are missing from our sacred texts about people's reproductive lives that must have been there because they were people and they reproduced. And we need to create spaces and opportunities for people to use the word abortion, for people to talk about the abortions they've had as normative health care, for people to talk about all of the reasons that they have abortions that include people who have no kids and lots of kids, people who have unwanted pregnancies and desperately wanted pregnancies, people who never thought they would have an abortion. All of those stories are necessary so that when we get to the State House, it's not something that gets whispered in hushed tones. It's something that we understand is a normal part of our lives.
Religious people have such an important role to play. Faith leaders, they have institutions where they can reach more people. They have moral platforms. They can get more likely to get letters to the editor and op-eds published. When they say something, they have moral authority, even with someone who's not necessarily their religion. I know a lot of Jews, we've experienced this, even with Christians, like in these interfaith circles, when you're coming as a person of faith, there's sort of some automatic credo. But I guess what I really feel is, this is a little the radical point, people of faith, and I've been debating this, to be honest, of recent times, because the strategy right now has been, like my friend Amanda Tyler, who in Texas is running Baptist Joint Committee, and she runs a great project called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And I am so excited to see so many Christians fighting Christian nationalism. It's excellent and exactly what needs to be happening. Often, Christians are fighting Christian nationalism from a Christian perspective, right? Like, this isn't really what Jesus would do, and Sermon on the Mount and all these things, right, that I'm learning, right? And, praying ostentatiously, the whole thing. But I think and I understand strategically that's really powerful. But I think it's really important that religious leaders and people of faith also talk about living in a country with a lot of other people who are very different from them. And that they're also rooting their advocacy not just in Christianity, but in American values, American promises, even ones that we haven't attained. And one fundamental American promise is religious freedom. Thomas Jefferson was such a fan of it that he even, cut things out of his Bible when he was talking about the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which he wrote first, which was the underlier for the language in the First Amendment that protects religious freedom. He talked about protecting, in the 1700s, he talked about protecting the Gentile and the Jew, the Hindu, the Mohammedan, and the infidel of every faith. In the 1700s. So religious freedom is one of the things that the founders got right. They actually got some things very wrong as well, but religious freedom is something they got right, and we need to, certainly as people of faith, I don't think everyone here is probably a person of faith, and I was gonna ask you to raise your hands because that's something that I do, like who's a person of faith, who's non-religious, but I'm not gonna ask you to do that in Texas. I'm really not, because that's something that I've learned. Like, I'm from the city in Chicago, and it's like I grew up in this community where it was progressive, and it's been a learning experience for me to hear from our non-religious members about the way they're discriminated against in different parts of the country in very real ways. So I'm not even going to ask that of you all, but I'm going to say that my guess is that we've got both folks in this room, because that's what this type of issue attracts, and that's beautiful, right? Because that's how we win, when we come together across differences. But people of faith have a particularly important role, because abortion is a moral issue, and they have a moral platform.
Thank you so much. I find it interesting. Amanda Tyler shares that she looked all across the country for where they were going to go with Christians Against Christian Nationalism, branching out of D.C., and they found Dallas, Texas to be the perfect spot. So, yeah. So both the AU and the Jewish community at large have played major parts in the fight for reproductive rights. And I just want to know, how has your experience with advocacy, with your work, changed, or how does it differ in this post-Roe Dobbs era?
I mean, I think that this post-Roe Dobbs era is a wake-up call to a right that we took for granted, and a reminder that progress doesn't happen by itself. And that the long arm, or the moral arc of the universe may bend towards justice, but it bends where we pull on it. And if we let go, it starts to straighten back out again or bend the other way. And this right that you and I grew up in a time when, I've never known a time but when there wasn't legal abortion in the United States. In some ways, I think we took it for granted. I tell often the story that I grew up hearing the story of my grandmother's illegal abortion before Roe. In fact, she was approached by a group of people who were trying to put together a lawsuit to try and legalize abortion. She passed. They found Roe instead. And so I heard about this world that I sort of couldn't imagine before Roe v. Wade. Where her doctor had to lie on her medical form and say she'd had a miscarriage. And the other story I think of, I think the Jewish community does like to think we show up in this fight, and we do show up in this fight, but my first job out of college was at the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, an interfaith pro-choice organization. I'm now honored to be on their board, but at the time we were having a convening of the board, and someone pulled me aside knowing that I was a staff member and that I was Jewish. And she asked me very pointedly, she said, the Jews were instrumental in founding this organization. There were rabbis who were a part of the Clergy Consultation Service, which was the Underground Railroad of ministers and rabbis that got women abortions in the period before Roe that became the Religious Coalition. And then she said, but where are the Jews now? And as she looked around the room, and as I looked around the room, the seats that had been filled by Jewish organizations were empty with just the placard. Because we took it for granted, and because we moved on to other fights, and because maybe we didn't know if it was in our interest to be so loud on this issue. And I don't wish a wake-up call on anyone. But for me, it's a reminder, not just on this issue, but on all the rights that we appreciate and all the gains that we've made in the last few decades, that once you make a gain doesn't mean it can't go away, and that we have to continue to show up in the conversation and continue to show up in the fight if we want to keep those rights.
So 3 answers for me. How has my sort of advocacy or approach changed since Dobbs? So the first is, I realize that there's some privilege in saying that for me this was like the biggest slap in the face insult that the law has ever delivered to me in my life. And that night, I literally went straight to the Supreme Court. Just it was the only place I could be, and was with a bunch of similarly upset folk. But because I always championed reproductive rights, I worked at the National Women's Law Center, but it makes me want to call out the reality that abortion bans are efforts to control women's bodies and to punish women for having sex, basically, if I may say so. And I don't think I felt that, for whatever reason, I didn't used to articulate that pre-Dobbs, but now I feel like it has to be said. Perhaps it feels obvious to many of you, but I didn't used to go around saying it. So that's thing number 1, I'm calling that out. And today we know that restrictions on reproductive care affect people who identify not as women too, but I think these bans originate in sexism, and I just want to call that out. Number 2, the religion component of abortion bans. I want to call myself out because when I worked at the Religious Action Center, I will say that I used to feel that when we would sign on to these letters saying that these, restrictions in the states are, offend our religious freedom, I would say that's kind of weak. Honestly, I used to say that because at least the way I grew up, that was just so far from my radar. This, to me, reproductive care bans were attacks on women, attacks on equality, attacks on privacy. I really didn't used to think of them as being such virulent attacks on religion. I grew up in the age of, the silent scream movies and, you know what I mean? So it was sort of like, well, aren't there a lot of reasons though? You know what I mean? I've had these debates with people, but I have seen the light. I really understand that there isn't, the belief about when life begins. And, they talked about it in the film, in our abortion lawsuit in Missouri, which ended up being on behalf of 14 clergy from 7 different religious denominations. The judge actually just ruled on Friday. He just dismissed our case. We're talking about what to do next, so don't give up hope, because we're not. But we had a tight case, but the judge even said it's an extremely difficult question to answer whether the belief that life begins at conception is a religious one. It's not extremely difficult, but the judge was at least hedging on it. And I think that it's really important to highlight that. I think for a long time, religious extremists got smart and they didn't talk openly about the religious motivations for the bans. They scrubbed it from their laws. And this is, during a time in our country when JFK ran for president and had to give his absolute church-state separation bona fides. So it was just not acceptable, right? Whereas today, they're so emboldened, religious extremists across our country, that they're literally inserting their religious language into the law. Like in Missouri, they said, because Almighty God is the author of life and life begins at conception. And, so it's all right there, right? And it's out in the open. So we have this opportunity to call attention back to the truth again, right? The truth about the sexism, I don't want to forget that part. And the truth about the religious freedom violation. And the third thing that I'd say is, I'll save it actually. That's been a long answer.
Well, I think
The suspense is killing me.
I think we have some wonderful questions from the audience that I would like to get to. All right, so this question is asking, where are all the young women and men who are most affected by the Dobbs decision?
Fleeing Texas? I like seriously, and I do think we need to get the business community involved in this fight too, because my synagogue has had a couple of jobs open for more than a year. And part of the reason we did national searches and people of childbearing age are not moving to Texas. And so, I said that jokingly, but it's a real problem, and it's a real problem that we haven't seen the full effects of yet, but it's going to get much worse in states where there are abortion bans. But I do think that the young people are fired up about this, and I do think that that our high school students, our college students, are passionate about this, and didn't grow up taking for granted because they saw the cracking and the chipping away at Roe with the same kind of sort of privileged taking for granted that we did. I take a group of high school students every year. This feels like it's just a commercial for the Religious Action Center, but I swear it's not, to a conference that the Religious Action Center does, and the high school students get to choose what issues they learn about and ultimately lobby on in front of Congress. And I've been heartened to see that more and more of my students are choosing to go to the sessions on and lobby on reproductive freedom because for them the stakes are incredibly real.
I mean, I am finding that too. I mean, at AAU, Americans United, at au.org, for those of you who want to join us tonight, please do. We need you. We have more youth than ever who are engaging with us. 900 of them are entering our high school essay and video contests. At our Summit for Religious Freedom in Washington, we had tables and tables of them. We have a youth organizing fellowship. We get tons of applications every year. We have a legal academy that we run for law students, and they're flooding in. So we are seeing a lot of activity. They're showing up to vote. They have been showing up to vote. Let them show up to vote. Everybody, do everything you can, because there's a lot of, I don't want to vote, I don't like, vote, right? It's like the most powerful way we can express ourselves. So I am a big fan of encouraging that, but I think we're seeing a lot of activity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, if you think your individual vote doesn't matter, I challenge you to look at some election results that have been won by dozens of votes. So,
I mean, Molly Cook was just here, left a second ago, won by 74 votes. So yeah, any one of your friends who says your vote doesn't matter, point them in the direction of Senator Molly Cook.
Absolutely. So this question is for you, Rabbi Fixler. It's asking why other rabbis in other Jewish communities might not be as clear on the abortion regulations and rights, and what is there to do about that for those folks?
So first of all, I think I have tons of colleagues in Texas, in Houston, and around the country who are very clear. And who may be clear in different ways than me. Like I've had a lot of practice at this. Like my classmates from rabbinical school have jokingly started calling me abortion rabbi. Like this is a big part of what I do, and it's my passion. And once you get me started talking, you can't get me to stop. And other rabbis and cantors and Jewish leaders, educators have taken different tacts. Have found other ways to lift up their own and other people's voices on this issue. So I want to say they're doing it. And I want to say, if you want to see your rabbi, minister, pastor, priest, cantor out there doing this more, they need to know that you'll be there with them. They need to know that you are going to help them have the conversation with the other congregants who don't think that's appropriate from the Bema rabbi. They need to know that if they get out in front, they're not going to be alone. And so it's not enough to say, you're not doing enough, Rabbi. I got a lot of people who tell me I'm not doing enough, Rabbi, about a lot of things. But the people who get me to do more are the people who say, where are we going together?
Absolutely. So this question, Rachel, is asking for just more information about the recent lawsuit and next steps. I know you said you're just responding now and just getting the decision, but just any more that you could say about that.
Okay, sure. So at the time that I filmed this, I was frustrated because we were planning to announce this lawsuit, but you can't do that before you file because you put the other side on notice. So we couldn't say a word. And then after, I was able to give her like a sentence without a state. It was literally, she wanted that text right when we were on the verge also of filing, like that week. When we filed, we ended up filing on behalf of 14 clergy from 7 different religious denominations. The Episcopal Bishop for St. Louis, the folks from United Church of Christ, that was our lead plaintiff actually, Reverend Tracy Blackman, who's on our board now. She wasn't then. We got to know her through this lawsuit. Yeah, it was very cool. A Methodist member of the state legislature in Missouri, Unitarians, and rabbis, Reform, non-denominational, and a Maharat, which is like the equivalent of an Orthodox female rabbi. So it was an eclectic crew. We actually wanted to find a non-believer, someone who was the way that we felt it would play better for the courts was to have like an officiant in a non-believing denomination. And literally they had all fled Missouri, to your point. So we couldn't find one, which was a shame because we would have loved to include that too. We made arguments under the state's establishment clause, right? So we've been talking around this, and the film talked around this, but the way that religious freedom is protected is through 2 things. Free exercise of religion being protected, but also the state committing to not establish religion or favor one over any other or religion over non-religion. So the Establishment Clause is sort of what puts a stop on the free exercise of religion coming into the government and imposing it on you or causing you harm and making you have to pay the cost of someone else's religion. It's a debate right now in this religious freedom community what the best way is to go. Let me explain it. So on the one hand, there are all these lawsuits like Rabbi Silver, and by the way, I just want to say, may he rest in peace. He passed away since this, Rabbi Barry Silver. But there are a lot of lawsuits that were being brought under state free exercise clauses because state constitutions all mimic the federal one. Sometimes their protections have been read to be a little broader or the same or not as great, but they all have a version, right? So there's a lot of these lawsuits that are being brought under, I have the right as a Jewish person to do what I want with my body, right? And so those are popular today because religion is pretty popular in America right now and in the courts. And so it feels like a more winnable argument to say, I should have the right to the free exercise of my religion. What's the problem with it? I mean, again, without insulting it, because there's a lot of different approaches, there's a couple. So one problem with it is the remedy that you get from the court is just as to those folks, or perhaps folks from that religious denomination. But the ban would still be in place as to everybody else. So that's one problem. Another problem is, ever since this country passed our #1 religious freedom law, which is called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, right from the beginning, it started being used a lot to discriminate, especially against people in our society who have less power and who are more vulnerable. So for example, right away, women teachers were paid less for their salary, and the claim was made, well, the Bible says you should be staying at home, and so my right to pay you less is protected by the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Today, the free exercise argument is being used a lot to harm our LGBTQ brothers and sisters so much. And so the concern is when we bring a lawsuit that takes that same tact, are we developing that argument further and causing more harm, right? So that our lawsuit, by contrast, sued only under the Establishment Clause, only under the idea that this law establishes favor for one narrow set of religious beliefs, right? By the way, that's what Sonia Sotomayor said to the Solicitor General arguing for Mississippi in the Dobbs case. She said during the oral argument, how is your interest anything different than a religious one? In our case, the lawmakers happened to all say it out loud. They literally said, well, as a Catholic, or my personal religious beliefs, we put together a reel of all of them just saying it and putting it on the record. And then they inserted that language into the law. So in Missouri, the law has been interpreted to be more protective of the government not being able to favor religion. So we brought this case as a state case under the State Establishment Clause. It was a pretty tight case, and it just got thrown out largely on the argument that, which is this new fake test that the US Supreme Court has passed down now to the state courts, that we need to look at our history and tradition in this country. Such a dangerous argument. And even the judge in this opinion was really grappling with it, because he said multiple times, it is true that like back in the 1800s and these laws that I'm citing in Missouri that banned abortion and the like, women couldn't even vote. You know, and he kept saying it and saying it. And oh yeah, like the first woman wasn't elected to our state legislature until the 1970s, and the first woman wasn't on our state Supreme Court until the 1980s, right? So there's big problems that I hope I don't have to go into too much about a history and tradition analysis, but that is what the court based it on. So now what happens is we discuss it among ourselves as lawyers, and then the next step is to go to our plaintiffs and say, what do you want to do to these 14 religious leaders? And that's the phase that we're at. I mean, what would you want to do if you were them?
Wow. So much to be done, and so much already going on. I'm excited in some ways to see where this goes. So, before we have Nancy come back up here with us, I want to wrap up with one last question. I've spoken with a lot of folks who feel really discouraged and hopeless about this situation. We've touched on it a little bit tonight, but I want to put a real point on this. What can people be doing right now to make a difference?
I'll go first and let you have the closing word on that one. Couple of things. All of which we've said tonight. You could be talking about abortion. I mean, the fact that you're here is already a thing that you're doing, right? Like you all showed up when it's torrentially downpouring out there. And you, for a conversation on a Monday night where you had other things to do, on a Tuesday night, I don't know what that is. That's big. And you are a part of the people who are going to be out there fighting abortion stigma by telling your stories in the places where it feels safe to tell your stories, encouraging others to tell theirs in the places where they feel safe to tell their stories. And whether that's between two people or in a room of 300 people, that's really important. And I know you all are going to vote, so I'm not going to tell you to vote. I am going to tell you to make sure your friends vote. Our congregation, and we've been partners with Texas Impact, and I'll shout out Texas Impact for being really leaders in this work, did a study, Our congregation did a study, looked at the first year we did voter engagement work, we found out that in 2018, our congregation voted slightly below the county average. Less of our congregants voted by percentage than the average Houstonian, even though 99.9% of our congregants are registered to vote. And we realized we had work to do. In 2020, because of that work, we beat the county average by about 2 points, and in 2022, we beat it by about 5 points. And we still have more work to do. But the thing that I'm saying is, like less than 50% of people voted in the last election. And when you call them and you say, hey, do you have a plan to vote? They say, yeah, I'm going to vote. Don't worry about me. I got it. But like 50% of them are wrong. I know. I've seen the data. And I want to shout out Sydney Greenblatt, who's been a big leader in that work, and a couple other people. Lisa Stone's here. And so it's not enough to want to vote. You got to make a plan to vote, and you got to vote early. Because on election day, you're going to get busy and the lines are going to get long. And like I said, the presidential election is not going to be decided by 74 votes, but there are going to be elections in the state of Texas that are decided by 74 votes, and Molly Cook is the evidence of that. And so we got to show up, and we got to show up not just for the big election in November, we got to show up even when the state house has decided that we should have 4 elections in 2 months in Houston, because they're hoping that no one will show up for the 4th. And it's work and it's hard, and you got to figure out who to vote for in the world. You got to do a lot of that research. But if you're going to talk about abortion, if you're going to show up to places where other people are talking about abortion, and you're going to make sure your friends vote, I think hopefully that's something.
I mean, you took it all. You took it all. And also Nancy's going to come up and tell you more about sort of how to join the chapter here, which is so important. I'll go with 2 things. One is we need your money. Really, we need your money. I mean, the other side has invested so much money in religious extremism and white Christian nationalism. Leonard Leo, the Koch brothers, a bunch of folks here in Texas with a lot of oil money. Yes, exactly. I mean, there's plenty of articles written up, right? I mean, we added up the annual revenue of the groups that were against us. We argued the praying football coach case in the Supreme Court and lost it. The Coach Kennedy case, we argued on behalf of the Bremerton School District, the public school district that was trying to protect the religious freedom of the kids. And we added up the annual revenue of each of the organizations that entered a brief against us. And it totaled $1 billion. $1 billion. So we are genuinely fighting a $1 billion shadow network. And the thing with the other side is they've stuck to the cause. They have stuck to it even when the arguments that they were making seemed like way out of the mainstream, right? They've stuck with it, all playing the long game, and now their arguments are mainstream. And that's what we need on our side. We have really not as many members in Texas as you would think. And what I've found is when we travel to places that are witnessing and living religious extremism and white Christian nationalism, we actually resonate quite a bit. So we need more support, really, genuinely. So au.org, you can donate there, you can join us there. So that's one of the things. And then the second thing that I'll just say is I'm a big fan. I just actually was asked to deliver the baccalaureate at Lehigh University this year, which was a real honor. And it was frustrating because I wanted to talk all about church-state separation, but they told me I couldn't be political. And I didn't want the chaplain to lose his job. So, I looked inside and thought about kind of why I care about church-state separation so much, and what a world looks like where there is church-state separation. And I think it looks like a world where we can all be very authentic and very vulnerable and be safe and equal. And I think the best way to create the world that we want is to model it. So what if we all showed up in all of our circles and called ourselves back together and were just authentic and vulnerable? I think there's a lot of hope there.
Thank you both so much, and a round of applause for both our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you all so much to our fabulous participants tonight. We want to stay engaged with you and connected with you. Rabbi Fixler said something about we want to work together. I forgot your words, but we want to work together on the next step. So to ensure that you stay connected to us, we would like to give Rabbi Fixler and soon-to-be Pastor Riley a complimentary one-year membership in our Americans United chapter. And it comes with this magazine that members are get if you join. So thank you very We also want to thank St. Philip Presbyterian Church. Its office manager, Laura Castle, in particular, was a joy to work with, so you may see us have more programs here in the future. And I want to thank all of the volunteers who helped out tonight. We are a volunteer organization. Rachel Lazar and Brian Silva, who's sitting in the front row here, are staff members, and I hope you do donate to help pay their salaries and those of the other wonderful staff up there. But we who lead the Houston chapter, we're all volunteers. So I want to express my appreciation to all those who came out tonight. And I want to single out in particular Hallie Trevis. Hallie Trevis is sitting in the back of the yellow shirt. She has been on that board for a number of years. She's decided that she's going to retire from the board, and I told her I would only allow that if she promised to stay engaged with us. But she has really done a lot. If the reception that I'm going to invite you all to, a lot of the logistics surrounding this program, Hallie has been responsible for. Now, she'll tell you, as she's told me, that she doesn't know how to plan an event. Well, that's not true. And in fact, if any of you want experience, want to learn how to plan an event, please volunteer for it with us. We will have you shadow Hallie, work with Hallie so you can help us plan our next event. I also want to thank, of course, all of you for coming. I hope that you all learned something tonight. And I also hope that you are all motivated to become advocates for separation of church and state, and also the notion that reproductive freedom is religious freedom. If we all go home tonight and you say, well, that was an interesting program, and you get up the next morning and get back to your usual routine, that's not going to make a difference. One of the last questions was, what can you do? How can you make a difference? And I want to suggest a few ways. Of course, the ways you heard are important, but I want to suggest a few other things that you can do. Of course, the first step is to stay informed. You can do that easily by staying connected to our chapter and the national organization. Watch your email for our chapter. We send a monthly newsletter and occasionally action alerts or special announcements of programs such as this. And the national organization also emails out a Saturday weekly review that tells you what's going on with the organization in this field. Behind me on the board here is our contact information, how to stay in touch with us as a chapter through social media and email. If you want, you can take a picture of those. We've also got these cards at the back that have all of our information on them. So again, we encourage you to stay educated. But like I said, that's only the first step. I hope you will take other steps. For example, you could share what you've learned tonight with others, as Rabbi Fixler suggested, either specifically about this topic, about this program, or about Americans United. You could share the recording of the program that we're going to send you the link to. Send it to others by email that you think would be interested. Post it on your social media. You could invite us to give the presentation that I talked about earlier, reproductive freedom is religious freedom. And that way, people who are in the same organizations that you are,